First news story of the week. Obviously, we've got to talk about this, although we don't really want to because it's profoundly depressing. But how can you describe this? Microsoft seems to be hell bent on destroying its own credibility, and it continues with the closure of various studios from Bethesda Games. So, just looking at the headlines here, three studios under ZeniMax Media are being shut down. Arcane Austin, creators of Prey, Redfall, it's been shut down. Alpha Dog Games is gone. And most shockingly of all, I think, to many people, Tango Gameworks, creators of The Evil Within, and most recently, the rightly celebrated Hi-Fi Rush has been shut down as well. Roundhouse Studios is being folded into ZeniMax Online to create more Elder Scrolls Online content, I assume. Apparently, some members of Arcane Austin are being moved on to other studios. But ultimately, John, this is the scenario which we never thought would happen, because the narrative was that Game Pass requires a rich diversity of games, and in acquiring Bethesda Game Studios, with all of those studios creating a rich diversity of games, well, it's a perfect partnership, right? But lo and behold, it's game over for the likes of Tango Gameworks and Arcane Austin, most primarily, which is inconceivable and unfathomable almost. Thoughts?
Yeah, it's a strange and sad situation. You say we never thought it could happen, but there's been a lot of suspicion over the years, both from us internally, from developers we've spoken with, and just general that Game Pass as a model, it's going to be difficult to sustain it. So I always kind of had a suspicion that some developers might close over this. The thing is, though, is I don't think any of us expected them to be these developers. I can kind of see why someone might look at the Redfall situation and want to close Arcane. But Hi-Fi Rush has been a dramatic hit for Microsoft. It's the kind of shot in the arm that Xbox really needed, right? And based, as far as we can tell, it almost seems like because these two companies just happen to be quote unquote between projects, like they shipped their games last year, they were pitching new ideas and it was ready, that I could imagine someone saying, well, it's going to take a game's amount of time to develop a new game. So, let's get rid of them now. But no, the whole thing to me. So there was this post from Brad Hildebrand, who was previously a PR and comms leader at Microsoft and EA, I suppose, and he noted that two things. First of all, obviously the Game Pass stuff, which we can possibly get more into, but that can be difficult to sustain if Game Pass itself is not growing at the rate that it needs to grow. And it does seem as though numbers have somewhat stagnated in recent months, which makes things difficult, especially when you say something like Hi-Fi Rush, you put that out on Game Pass, it does well, but it only kind of floats around at the top for like a month. And this is what Brad was suggesting. And then it kind of sinks back into the list of games there. The games that kind of stick around are those that are more multiplayer focused, I guess. The things that have a community where people continue to play it. So a game like this kind of falls off a cliff, and it maybe didn't get the same upfront sales that it would have gotten on its own. Although, unfortunately, in this day and age, a game selling like this is probably not the easiest. And as we've seen, it hasn't exactly lit up the sales charts on PS5 either. But the bigger thing seems to be, as he suggests, like 3 or 4 years ago, he says the Xbox was basically a rounding error on the Microsoft books, which that's a bit hyperbolic, I would say, but it's fair to say that Microsoft being the world's richest company, I think right now,
Probably, yeah.
they, something like Xbox division, the way it was running probably was something that they could kind of keep going and realistically keep running without necessarily demanding the same types of returns and on investment that you might normally expect. But when they shelled out 70 billion for Activision, it's kind of feels like perhaps Satya and them and shareholders and the like suddenly turn their gaze. It's like, now you've spent a ridiculous amount of, I guess it's not like they're forking out the cash. There's a lot more to it than that, but this makes Xbox a much more expensive proposition to operate. And a lot of the decisions as of late, from the multi-platform stuff to what's happening here and potential ideas for the future, to me, it feels like decisions driven not by the Xbox people, but like the people above the Xbox people, right? You saw how gleeful Satya was when they talked about the multi-platform stuff recently. I mean, none of this stuff like brand loyalty, console wars, all the stuff that they've kind of fostered over the year within Xbox, he does not give a shit about any of that. Obviously, he's there. The man is there to make money, and Xbox was not exactly it. It's in third place, right? It has been in third place for a long time at this point, and now they spend a ton of money on it. So it's time to change things, and I feel like this is all part of the change that they want to go through. And I suspect that we're looking at a complete change to the Xbox strategy that will possibly end in like the Xbox as a dedicated console going away, becoming something else. They are going to, I don't think they're going away as a business, but I think it's going to completely shift. And along with that sort of like harsh businessman mentality, I think it's possible that studios with that have shown themselves to just be creative and successful on the mindshare front probably don't interest him that much. And so for those investors and those top people to sort of slash those away, because if you just look at the numbers, like, okay, they shipped games. Now you're going to have to invest X amount of money for however many years, 3 to 5 years probably, before a new product is ready for them to release. So that's a huge investment there. Perhaps that's what they looked at then. They're like, well, we don't really need to do this right now. We have plenty of other things, and we're making cuts. So, I mean, that's just my scatterbrained attempt at sort of putting together things like Brad said, and also looking at, considering my own thoughts on the matter. But it just seems like business has caught up with it, and they're changing strategy. And these studios, unfortunately, got caught in that crossfire.
It does seem like strategy is being changed on the hoof, as it were, because clearly there's a lot of pushback within Microsoft because there's a lot of leaks, and the leaks do seem credible, and they do seem to change on an almost monthly basis now, based on the new stuff that actually seems to be happening internally that nobody can quite get their head around. I think ultimately there's a profound leadership issue here. And I can illustrate that quite easily. The announcement came as a shock, I think, primarily because all of the communication from the key leadership people at Xbox over the last few years is entirely at odds with this decision, right? So, I guess maybe it's a good thing and a bad thing that Microsoft execs are actually quite vocal. It's a good thing in that obviously you want to know what's happening at Xbox, you want to know what's going on, but it's a bad thing in that when a corporate decision is made that is entirely at odds with your comms over the last few years, questions are then raised about the leadership. So, let's be honest here. We've got on the record quotes from the likes of Aaron Greenberg saying that Hi-Fi Rush was a mega hit that exceeded expectations. We've got quotes from Phil talking about how he supports Arcane Austin and Tango Gameworks in their creative endeavors. And, all of this is entirely at odds with the actual reality that's just unfolded before us in the last week. And suddenly the talkative execs aren't really talkative anymore, right? Which,
you see, Rich, like Sarah even posted some stuff about Tango Gameworks as recently as like a month or so ago that seemed like celebrating many more years to come. And then when you look at some of the answers, like she was interviewed, I guess, by Bloomberg.
Yeah, I saw that TV clip. Yeah, it was clown.
She didn't have an answer. It was just word salad. And based on that and like the way these guys were talking previously, to me it feels like this may have been something that surprised them as well. Because usually these things are in the works for quite a while, right? But to me it almost feels like, wait, maybe they weren't fully on board, or this just kind of came down from on high, and it's like, no, this is what's happening. It's as if the Xbox strategy that Phil that has been worked on for years, they've suddenly decided, okay, that doesn't work anymore. We're changing everything.
In which case, maybe we need another business update podcast. Although actually, maybe
Oh
maybe
yeah.
we
Oh
don't.
my goodness.
Alex,
Okay.
obviously you must have thoughts on this.
Yeah, for me, I agree, John, really a lot about the whole spending a lot of money on Blizzard thing, making room for Blizzard titles on Game Pass because you necessarily eat some of the revenue as a result of that would come in from the game sales. And that to make room for that on Game Pass means having less titles on Game Pass from other developers, maybe. I think that's a really, really smart thing to say, but I just want to talk about this from the aspect of maybe like in the short term, I think this is an absolute like self shot to the face.
Oh, yeah.
And like, it's so bad. And PR and just the way Microsoft and Xbox looks as a result, this is bad. But I also think internally, for medium to long term, this is also another hardcore self-own because you're getting rid of a lot of institutionalized knowledge and like structures of how to make a game to studios. I think Tango has shown that they're really good at putting out actually. They've put out in the last couple of years a number of titles, so they obviously know how to make games in a semi-expedient manner, and they're unique and different. I would say, their last two titles were very different from one another. You can have your own opinion on them, but they did produce two unique titles that were of a higher quality, especially Hi-Fi Rush, I would say. And they proved that they could do that. And then that's all gone. And I think Microsoft, ever since they canned and destroyed all of their internal studios and went full Call of Duty, Madden, TV cooler, and then they tried to rebuild that up after Xbox One kind of started up. And that was the whole initiative of Phil. They made the initiative. They've been fostering studios, buying studios since then. And I feel like this is the medium to long-term self-own here, where they get rid of their ability to create multiple new and interesting games over time that get people talking about Xbox as a brand by destroying this institutionalized knowledge and structure and workforce that is there by closing these studios. And I don't see exactly the strategy of that part, considering they've had such a hard time about getting out high quality games from a variety of studios. Like 343 has floundered. I'm going to say that Turn 10's most recent outing with Forza has been a huge problem and a disappointment. And other studios, some are better than others. Obsidian's doing pretty great, but they have problems getting out games that people talk about, and they start having that, and then they just immediately get rid of it. So I think in the medium to long term, I don't actually feel very confident as a result of this that Microsoft is going to put out quality games if they just are so comfortable with getting rid of people who make good games. So this is a very disappointing thing for me.
That's an interesting point, Alex. It does seem like they really have a problem with studio management right now. You hear constantly the drama going on in the background.
There were reported comments from Matt Booty concerning the ZeniMax closures that there wasn't really enough infrastructure to support that many studios. Which
why buy them all?
Which is obviously that's the point to make, right? Why buy them all? And even so, there has been a lot of failure. The whole Halo Infinite saga, Forza arriving in a state that was a bit disappointing, and with a game concept that was kind of based on live service.
Everything we've heard about the Perfect Dark project.
Perfect Dark, yep.
Not
oh my
good.
Gosh.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, there's a lot of issues there, and basically there were periods where it's kind of like a chicken and egg situation. Game Pass grows by having a continuous stream of great games, and those games didn't arrive or were delayed, and so there's this kind of massive beast that needs to be fed that wasn't being fed, and now we have these issues with growth on Game Pass. Maybe things will change this year because they've still got a lot of big games coming, starting with Hellblade 2 that's arriving very, very soon.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But I don't know. I don't think you can look at Hellblade 2 as a kind of AAA tentpole.
No.
It's not that
No.
kind of game. It seems to be cast in the same mold as the original, which is to say it's going to be great. It's going to be pretty awesome, but it's not, a AAA juggernaut as such.
I hope they don't assign that value to it, because I would be really worried if they're like, oh yeah, this is the next big AAA thing, and then it's Hellblade, because that's not what Hellblade was really designed to be. And those expectations probably would not be met.
Right.
Right.
I just think going back to the leadership thing, obviously there's all of these studios that are now a part of Microsoft looking at this, not hearing convincing rationale from leadership and wondering if they're next. I mean, I'm going to actually go to a couple of points raised by supporters on this. And, let's go straight to the thing that's been concerning me. Thomas Trala says, "Hey, DF team, I know we're all wondering which studio is next on the MS chopping block. Do you think Double Fine is safe? Their documentary showed Microsoft coming in and saving the day when they were out of money. So that would definitely be awful if they decided to shut them down. And this one from Zephyr, are the recent closings a warning from Microsoft to their other studios? Does Double Fine need to create the latest, greatest looter extraction shooter or else? I mean, that's not what you want to see. But, there's just this massive wave of uncertainty that's now amongst gamers, it's amongst the press, and it must surely be amongst the studios now. And, when we look at some of the rationale that we have seen about the closure of the ZeniMax studios, there was talk of concentrating on bigger, potentially more successful projects, which kind of, suggests a doubling down on key IP. But then again, we had another quote from Matt Booty talking about smaller, prestigious premium games, which is Hi-Fi Rush. And they've closed that studio down. There's just no clear messaging going on here.
To be fair though, Rich, to interject on that, the staff on Hi-Fi Rush, it seems to have been a large game in terms of, now obviously it includes like PR and everything, but the Moby Games link, it lists like 1,500 something people that were involved in Hi-Fi Rush overall. And I think it took up, this was some of the early pre-production stuff, but it was like 5 years in development.
Well, they sold it for $30. So it's not a $70 a game. So therefore, I would class it as a smaller scale project.
But maybe it needed to be. I don't know.
Not that it would have
sold. I wouldn't have sold at 70. I don't think, unfortunately, even though it deserves it. But it still seems like it took a large amount of time to make and a decent amount of people to make it. I would maybe classify it more as like a medium large kind of game. I mean, classifying games in that way is difficult anyway, but it's definitely not like a small project, I would say.
Well, do you think that's what Matt Booty meant? Because you're not going to, a small project that delivers.
I think Matt Booty doesn't know what the heck he's talking about. He even gets the names of studios wrong when addressing them in an official email. How insulting is that? That's just pathetic.
Yeah. Talking about though, like the future, where do you think in the short to medium term, from a PR perspective, how do you think Microsoft even attempts to recover from this? Because in the very short term, these the Sarabon non-quote, the Matt Booty also not good things that are said. Like, how do you come out of this at all and start looking forward and actually making progress to being successful again?
Right now, though, it's all going to come down to what's happening at the E3, quote unquote E3 showcase that's happening just a few short weeks from now. I just find it really challenging for, the format of that is essentially for the execs to come out and introduce games. But these are the execs which are now kind of discredited by their own words and the actions of Xbox. How are they going to produce a show like that? Do they just pretend none of this has happened? Do they focus on the positives? What is Xbox?
They need to do both. I think they need to somehow address this. Just coming out and pretending like nothing's changed would be a huge mistake for them. But I do think they also need to focus on the positive. And I mean, frankly, I think the shift that we're going to see is that Microsoft wants to become just a large publisher that also happens to produce some sort of bespoke hardware that is perhaps more PC-like, and they will abandon the traditional console market.
Right.
And I think that the shift was never going to be easy. I think they've done it horribly. They've done a very bad job with messaging around this, but I think that's probably the type of shift that we're looking at and the thing that they need to slowly work towards. But obviously this has really shaken a lot of confidence, I think, in their future, even as a publisher, because man, the thing is you said this in the chat, Rich, but I thought it was funny. You said that it feels more as if Activision has acquired Microsoft, or Xbox, I should say, rather than the other way around.
Yeah.
And these types of decisions feel especially Activision. They were the kings of funneling everybody to their cash cow projects at the expense of everything else, either shutting down or moving studios all into the Call of Duty mines, stuff like that. And this is the first time we're seeing in a while, I guess, Microsoft kind of do that as well. It feels like, where they're kind of suddenly taking that approach. I mean, we'll see, but
right.
I mean, I think that they can get back to a point where they're making good money, because if they're able to produce games and they just become a normal multi-platform publisher that also has their hardware, I think they'll be fine. It's just that the spirit of Xbox will probably be lost, and that is not good.
So your contention is that Microsoft will turn into like a mega publisher, which some might say they are already with these acquisitions.
Already are, but
we've got the rather fascinating scenario now that Sea of Thieves is doing great on PlayStation 5. That could apply to all games. I wouldn't be surprised to see Forza Horizon 5 appear on PlayStation soon. It's had a good run on Xbox, and why not extend it? It's still a state-of-the-art game, and why not? If that works, then why not extend it to all games? I just wonder, you're kind of starting to lose your identity at that point if if you don't have a hardware base to rally around. So your idea, John, is essentially that Microsoft would produce what you might call a reference device, which isn't designed to sell in the multi-millions, but is like an Xbox that would play Game Pass games great, that would hold up as a decent PC, that would allow you to access other marketplaces. Is that what you're thinking about?
That's my thoughts, actually. Like I think that they look at something like the Steam Deck and think, maybe this model is good for us. I mean, they have Windows. Valve is obviously pushing Steam Deck running Linux, but if they can offer something that's Windows based, has Xbox, has Game Pass, but also can run something like Steam on there, various other things, basically create more of a PC like device that almost gets back to what they wanted in the first place when the Xbox project began, right? It was just that core team that pushed them to not do that at the time. But I think hardware and software is in a place now where that actually could work. And I think that's just going to shift the way things mean. But that would also mean, I think, like you said, Rich, that would imply that actual Xbox games are no longer made.
Right. That's my concern, because,
it's Microsoft gaming now, it all becomes Microsoft gaming. The Xbox brand is just like, it's just part of them, but it's not like the central focus of their gaming efforts anymore.
I'm concerned about this, because I do think you need a device that is basically the focal point of your efforts, right? It's all very well going multi-platform.
They've had that though, and it hasn't worked.
Well, what else hasn't
like 11,
worked?
11 years.
Game Pass PC arguably hasn't worked. It hasn't delivered the kind of explosive growth that Microsoft wanted by expanding the platform outwards.
I think, interestingly, you look at this week was also the week where we got a glimpse at Nintendo's profit numbers, I guess. And it turns out that they've made more during the Switch years than every other year since like 1980 or something, combined. They are making a lot of money. Nintendo is also a company that is releasing a lot of games, and many of them are very small scale. They don't even internally develop them all, but they do fund and publish them. And you also aren't seeing a lot of closing of studios. You aren't seeing big layoffs or anything like that. There's more to it. Obviously, it's a complicated situation, especially with Japanese law. But I think the difference there is that, well, I mean, obviously they have a war chest of money to begin with, but they've made a lot of smart investments in terms of how they produce things. They haven't really chased the same super AAA highs that we've seen in the other industry, even though they do have some big AAA releases, such as the Zelda games.
Right.
But they've also they've continued to respect the value of their games. And I know this burns people up. The pricing on Nintendo games, they almost never go on discount. They're not on subscription services, all that kind of stuff. But it also means, and I've even caught myself in this mentality, when a new game hits and it's a Nintendo game, I'm very likely to just buy it right away. Even if I don't have time at the moment, it's just like, okay, I'll just get it now because it's not going to be on sale possibly ever, or you know what I mean? Or like it'll be years until it's on sale. With every other game on every other platform, it's going to be on sale soon, and it always is. So there's no point in buying on day one, especially as a physical game collector. Like I usually do not buy modern, PS5 or Xbox games day one if I'm getting the disc version, because it's going to get cheaper really soon, and it always does. This is race to the bottom, the race to subscriptions, the race, get all that quote unquote value, and that is technically good for the consumers' wallets, but it also has been like sort of reducing, I feel like, the inherent value of the games, like the perception of what games are worth. And you could say, well, phone gaming, the free to play stuff, that's also challenging it, and it is. But somehow Nintendo has managed to find this balance between keeping budgets in check on these games across a wide spectrum, and also like respecting the value of their games. And again, I know people aren't going to like that aspect because the price, it does make it less affordable, one could say, but it does seem to be working for them. And their games perform, even when it's just simple little stuff like that Mario versus Donkey Kong remake. Like, what the heck? Just there it is. It's good. It's technically competent. It is exactly what it says on the tin. But you ain't going to see the price dropping very low on that anytime soon. It is what it is.
How do you think Microsoft can come back from this? Because, I was speaking to various people, and the perception right now is that this is on par, if not worse, than the Xbox One TV situation, which kind of tanked the brand. Somebody else I spoke to when said a similar thing, but said, well, actually, they were selling games at that point, but they're not now.
Right.
Suggesting it was a lot worse. Where do you think they should go next, Alex?
Well, I'm going to be extremely pessimistic and just say it doesn't matter, because, John kind of showed or just described like a very different future for Xbox a little bit ago in this conversation, where it is more about just being a large multi-platform publisher and the brand dies. And from my perspective as a PC gamer, I don't care if the Xbox brand dies. It doesn't affect me. I just kind of want to play games. And as long as they produce good games, I'm fine with that. So I'm not attached to this, but I feel like I don't actually see a very good way out of this situation, because the hardware is not selling. Game Pass is stagnating in the current form. And, the signal from this decision is that the current model that we described through communication from our higher ups the last couple of years is not the model actually that we're going to be pursuing, or it's radically changed. So I feel like I don't know, maybe this is actually the moment of extreme departure, and we're going to be seeing in the next to near future a very different looking Xbox in the manner that John described it. So maybe this is actually, maybe there isn't a way out of this, and maybe this is just the new future's now, and it's going to start.
John, surely the way out of this is just great games, right? And they do have a good lineup for the rest of the year.
I mean, in terms of consumer mind share, sure. I mean, the games will help. But I guess what this situation has done is that it now creates this feeling of uncertainty within them, where if you're a fan of the platform, making a good game isn't enough, and it can just,
right,
end the studio.
Right.
And that does matter to at least the hardcore. But I'll be curious to see how much this actually impacts the average consumer in terms of like what they know about Xbox going forward, right? Because the 2013 debacle was something that even just like people that paid just a little bit of attention to the games market, they knew about this. They knew about what happened with the Xbox One. It got out there into the public sphere. Will this do the same? I'm not so sure about that. So while it does seem like a pretty big thing, and I do think it's going to shake the confidence in it, I think it may not matter that much for them in the end if they just, you know, for the types of plans that they're going after. But it definitely hurts the fans' connection to the brand. I mean, you see a lot of the hardcore Xbox fans out there, and there's ups and downs with the fan stuff, but man, that community, they are hurting right now. And I don't like to see everybody getting just like pile driven into the ground by business decisions. We've seen it before. I mean, I enjoyed Nintendo during the Wii U years, for instance, and that was not a kind time for Nintendo fans. But, you know, Nintendo does have that elasticity where they're able to kind of come and go. You know, they have these periods where they do terribly and then they snap back and they take over the world.
Well, I think from my perspective, there's still a massive leadership issue here. You've got this really bad news to put out there, and basically none of the execs want to talk about it. They're very, very talkative prior to that, but when the bad news comes, it just seems they disappear. You just get these weird comments, reported via hearsay almost. All of the stuff from Matt Booty came from reports of what he told people internally. The only external comms I can see was the Bloomberg interview with Sarah Bond, which, let's face facts, is a car crash. Didn't even answer the question properly. And there's no clear messaging to the studios that are working with Xbox what happens next. There's no clear messaging to the gamers, who are invested in Xbox, what's happening next. Why did this happen? Sarah Bond's public response seems to be it's about the long-term health of the business. Is Xbox losing money? I don't think it is. Game Pass still has a huge amount of subscribers. Let's talk about Game Pass just finally here, because obviously there's a lot of question marks surrounding the viability of the model. And we had a report recently. Microsoft has reaffirmed its commitment to day one for all of its top-tier titles on Game Pass.
Including Call of Duty?
Well, there wasn't a specific call-out for Call of Duty, but it was just saying that's the plan. But yes, we also had that report from Tom Warren of The Verge where people are asking internally, whoa, hold on a minute. Are we going to tank Call of Duty revenues by putting it on Game Pass? And that is a question which was probably never even, when I think back to the DFDX special we did when this acquisition was first mooted, it was like, well, this is going to produce massive growth for Game Pass. It will probably work. It will still be on the other platforms. But now there's this big question mark over Game Pass and its growth, the viability of its growth. John, do you think this is sustainable? Do you think it will go day one on Game Pass?
Oh, I don't know yet on that, but I don't think it's sustainable. Not with and so this is a larger industry problem right now, but I think just the budgets of games, the amount of time they take to develop, it's significant. The investment requirements are so large that even with a company like Microsoft trying to fund all of that and then Game Pass becoming like the primary means of delivering that content, I just don't see how the numbers work there.
Right.
And, I feel like there is a risk you put something like Call of Duty on there that the subscription numbers you may gain from it will not offset the loss in revenue that you would have gained by normal packaged or digital, whatever, like normal sales of the product. Activision famously did not want their Call of Duty games on Game Pass, right? And I feel like now that they have those numbers, perhaps it's it will become clear that, oh yeah, we probably shouldn't do that, which then again calls into the whole question of how well this service can actually work. And how long, if, yeah, it's just, I just don't know. And also you look at this, like, the idea, I think, was like, oh yeah, the big tentpole releases will fuel growth, which will then push people to play the other smaller games as well. And then we can use that to fund those studios. And that seems like not to be working out. And then obviously Call of Duty, man, the risk though of that is just insane, because like, I feel like, let's say they try it goes on Game Pass and it doesn't work, and they lose a lot of money. What do they do next? Do they walk it back the next year? That would anger so many people, and it would absolutely put a stake through the heart of Game Pass. I feel like people would feel betrayed by that, right?
Yeah.
So, but then if they don't do it, it also puts into question, like, wait, what about the day one Game Pass stuff? Like, they now have a very difficult question to answer. And I can't say that I have a lot of faith in them answering that question correctly at this point, based on things that have been transpiring. So I don't know, man. What do you guys think?
Alex, what do you think?
Well, it's hard. The Activision Call of Duty thing, like John just said, I think it's hard to know what Microsoft's going to do there when the time comes, which is just a couple months from now, I guess. So
More than that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know when the next Call of Duty comes out. November,
it'll be like
maybe?
November usually.
Yeah, so I guess we'll know then. But for the rest of the longer medium term stuff, I also am going to very much so question the viability of Game Pass longer term, just because beyond Activision Blizzard, I don't know. I'm feeling this has shook my confidence so much regarding it. Like, I wasn't super confident about it before, but I at least thought like maybe Microsoft has a good idea about how it's working. But since this flies in the face of what the model that it seems like they were proposing, I'm less confident overall. And I look at the catalog of games coming out, and yes, I'm very excited for Indiana Jones, a little bit muted on Hellblade. Very interested to see what the Coalition's going to do, but the last Gears game, it's being Xbox driven, and the Xbox platform isn't necessarily growing, and that's the primary area where you get your Game Pass subscribers. I don't know. I'm not sure if they have a big enough catalog of super high profile games to drive Game Pass growth to an area where they feel like it's ultra profitable and what they want, and to maintain it over long term. I really lack the confidence now that is the way things are going to shake out. But I am just a person sitting in an armchair here. Obviously analyzing something.
One might have assumed that when they made this acquisition, they did actually run the numbers and did some projections. How accurate they are now, though, we don't know. I mean, certainly this is like purely anecdotal and purely personal. But, we reached the point now. I think the tipping point for me personally was when Disney Plus upped its subscription from like 80 to like £130, I think. And it was at that point where not only did I cancel Disney Plus because, I just don't watch it enough, I also then started to look at everything else that I've subscribed to over the months and the years, and I did this, and just applied the scythe to stuff where I just don't see the value anymore. So at the moment, I've got Amazon, which is just mostly for the shopping side of things. I don't really watch it that much, and Netflix because the family watch it. Everything else is gone, and I think it's a kind of how can you describe it? Just kind of like people are starting to realize the effect on their finances that all of these subscriptions are having. And it doesn't matter where they are, whether it's in games, whether it's in TV and media, that sort of thing. People are being a lot more selective now, and they're realizing the financial hit that cumulatively all those services are having. So I can see that as being an obstacle to Game Pass growth. The Call of Duty thing, well, we'll just have to wait and see there. I'm not sure whether they have existing marketing arrangements with Sony that still persist for this year or not. I don't see any reason why the existing catalogue of Activision games couldn't be added to Game Pass, mind you, which I think would be fantastic. The question is, when's it going to happen? It happened in pretty short order after the Bethesda acquisition. Not so with Activision. So I'm wondering whether there's complexities which we're not aware of there that's stopping that from happening. But, I'm just looking at all of these supporter questions. And I think the thing that, that sort of hits me is just that there's no positive spin, no sort of counter argument being made against this that makes any sense. In fact, there's no counter arguments at all coming through. There's just anger, dismay, disappointment. And I think that's been reflected online from developers, from gamers. This is not being seen as a good thing. It's certainly being seen as a worrying thing. And there's no reassurance, no messaging from Xbox leadership about why this is happening and what's going to happen next.
That's wild.
That's kind of baffling, isn't it? Because, as I said previously, they've been, all too eager to share the successes. But when things are not looking so great, they're going missing.
Dude, it's wild this year. Like with those multi-platform rumors earlier this year, they just kind of let that fire burn for weeks, it felt like, before they came out and said anything. This is happening. Like, what's going on over there in terms of just messaging?
Yeah.
It seems dire.
It all looks like strategy being made on the hoof, just sort of changing on a month-by-month basis.
Maybe it actually is.
Well, you were talking about the Satya Nadella comments. And it's quite interesting that until the ABK deal, he didn't really seem to talk about Xbox at all.
He never talked about Xbox, did he?
But I think you're quite right, John. The acquisitions, the scale of ABK in particular, has basically put them on the radar.
In the crosshair.
Yeah, and it's not looking great.
Oh, gosh.
It's time to start earning like Office.
Well, look, there's a lot more questions that we could ask about this and where things go next. But ultimately, we're just commentating based on a void of information. There's just very little.
The next Xbox is going to be AI driven. Bam.
It's bam.
I'm just very worried about the future of Xbox if they don't have a strong platform to build around. If it is just going to be PC ports, they've got to have the infrastructure in place to make that happen. And the QA drastically needs to improve. If they can bring some of the QA that goes into console releases more generally to PC, fine, but that's kind of not the way that platform operates. I've got big concerns about that.